All right. So President Joe Biden continues to be directly confronted by people who are fed up with his endless and undying, unquestioned support for Israel's genocidal war on the people of Gaza at basically every single campaign event or speech that he has been publicly giving recently over the last couple of weeks and months here. And so I want to show you guys a couple of different examples of this, and then I'll give you guys my thoughts on the protests here, as well as the response from a lot of the crowd of his supporters. So let's go ahead and watch this first little clip here. Okay, so that's about the gist of it. We also had this here. According to Nathaniel Reed, there were about 13 other different disruptions at, I believe, this same exact campaign speech that he was giving here. And they actually used a good strategy in terms of a protest strategy here, where they were staggering their standing up and yelling at Joe Biden, where they couldn't all be rounded up and arrested and thrown out of the event at once. It was just a consistent stream after stream after stream of people interrupting him to try to pressure him in whatever way that they possibly can to get a ceasefire inside of Gaza there. So I commend their strategy there. I commend them for going out and directly confronting the president on this absolutely depraved policy that he has in regards to Israel's war on Gaza. But I mean, the thing that stands out to me on this front is not just Joe Biden, who, obviously his policy on Israel has been to basically try to work behind the scenes and to slightly, maybe on occasion, finger wag at the Israelis and say, oh, there have been too many Palestinian civilian casualties and maybe you need to wrap this up sometime soon. But in the meantime, giving them, weapons supplies, giving them international cover at the United Nations, giving them public PR on a daily basis and defending every single action that they take. This strategy has obviously been an abject failure for a number of different reasons, and it's immoral and it's depraved and it's barbaric. But at the same time, something else that stood out to me is not just Joe Biden's response here of seemingly like blankly staring out into the crowd, and then later he turned around to face his raging supporters back here, but it's the supporters themselves, which really kind of is depressing to me in a large way. I mean, it would be one thing if some Trump supporter stood up out of the crowd and said, Joe Biden, you're an evil communist who stole the last election, or something like that. And then you chant in response to that, 4 more years, 4 more years. Okay, fine. That's fine and great, right? But for somebody to stand up out of the crowd and to say, Genocide Joe, how many kids in Gaza have to be killed? And to try to drown out these protests, as well as these other ones that we heard as well, with chants of 4 more years. I don't know if these people don't care about the issue. I don't know if they're unaware of what these people are protesting against or for. I don't know if they're just such diehard Biden stans that everything else gets drowned out into the background. But to me, that's just so dystopian and gross to chant 4 more years in response to people who are saying, hey, you know what? Maybe the killing of 25 to 30,000 innocent people, the killing of over 12,000, 13,000 innocent children at this point, maybe that's not a good thing. Maybe we should end the genocide. Maybe we should get a ceasefire in place as quickly as possible, which is something that Joe Biden has the authority, has the power to do, to influence the state of Israel unilaterally, essentially, as the greatest arms supplier, the greatest ally, the greatest international defender of Israel. I mean, Joe Biden has the power to stop this. And so to turn around and to chant 4 more years in response to people who are protesting against the support of a genocide, to me is just, it's so beyond the pale. But this is something we've seen repeatedly, right? I showed you guys that recent protest that took place at a church. I forget which state exactly it was in. And you had the same exact response from the crowd there when people were calling for a ceasefire and an end to the genocide. And they chanted 4 more years, 4 more years. Later on, and I didn't get to cover this on the channel, but Mark Lamont Hill actually had a really good response standing at the exact same pulpit at that church that Joe Biden was previously at, and condemning the church for even having somebody like Joe Biden as a representative of the American empire to give a campaign rally, a campaign speech at that church. So he did a really good job on that. Go and look that up if you want to. I think that David Dole did a video on that. But, I support these protests. I think that these are good. I think that there's been a lot of back and forth in terms of what kinds of strategic, approaches to protesting Joe Biden and the U.S. government's support for this. There's been a lot of debate surrounding the strategies there, right? You have protests like this who are directly confronting the Joe Biden administration, whether it's Biden himself or Kamala Harris or Nate Sullivan or John Kirby or, Lloyd Austin, whoever the case may be. I think these protests are effective. I mean, Biden obviously is directly hearing them. I think that the protests outside of the White House that have been absolutely relentless, I've been to a number of them myself. Those have been somewhat effective in terms of, creating an omnipresent sort of force there to make sure that the issue doesn't just, get swept under the rug or slides away. I think those are effective. I think my favorite protests that I've seen have been, the ones who are directly trying to blockade the exporting of weapons or the exporting of, shipments to the government of Israel at ports that have taken place not only here in the United States, but around the rest of the world as well. Those have been great. There's been some debates about, okay, should we be blocking traffic and inconveniencing regular people as a form of protest? I'm in support of basically anything that, helps to bring about any sort of pressure that brings an end to this genocide. But, these kinds of protests I'm in full support of. I don't think that, members of the Biden administration who are currently supporting Israel's actions deserve to have a single moment of peace, deserve to have a peaceful campaign rally. No, we should be disruptive of that in whatever capacity that we possibly can, right? Obviously. And so we also had this protest that took place at the UAW sort of meeting or conference that was going on, and they were also dragged out when they were trying to protest Joe Biden, and they were dragged out. You can see it in this video here. I'll just sort of scroll through this real quick. Taken out of the meeting by their hands, for calling for a ceasefire. And this came, as the UAW was apparently gearing up to endorse Joe Biden for 2024, which, to me is a little bit confusing for a number of different reasons. I could make a plausible argument that Joe Biden is probably the most pro-union president of my lifetime. I'm only 24 years old at this point. I could make a plausible argument for that. But that's not necessarily because Joe Biden is like a super, super pro-union guy on policy, but it's more so that we've had a string of endlessly, anti-union presidents throughout the entirety of my lifetime. Joe Biden is slightly more amenable to union interests, right, with his National Labor Relations Board and all of that good stuff. But the UAW decided to, I guess, endorse Joe Biden over Donald Trump. Now, granted, Joe Biden is better on unions than Donald Trump. That's an objective fact, right? But has he done enough to earn the endorsement of a major union, especially under a more leftist, a more radical leadership under Sean Fain? I don't think that he has. And I'm not just basing that on, my personal opinion. I'm basing it off previous statements from Sean Fain himself. We just had this from a couple of days ago, right? He said, "We don't stop our fight for justice at the workplace. We don't stop our fight for justice because it's not the right time. When and where there's a war, whether it's in Vietnam or in Gaza, we call for peace." So, this was sort of a major speech that he gave where I listened to this and I was like, damn, that's base as fuck. This is, it's nice to have a major union leader who is actually willing to call out the president of the Democratic Party, which typically unions have supported throughout recent history. And, to not only do that, but to pose direct challenges to him in face-to-face meetings that they've had. This was some recent reporting here where Biden and Sean Fain held a direct meeting with each other to try to work out whether or not the UAW was going to give this official endorsement to Joe Biden. And Fain told Biden, quote, "We don't agree as to whether or not you are actually as pro-union as you should be." And he then rattled off a series of issues where he said that the president should do more. Biden would have to help, Fain told him, to make sure the next generation of auto jobs would be worth workers' time. And this isn't how U.S. labor leaders tend to behave. For a generation, they've mostly lined up behind Democratic nominees and taken what they could get. And while both parties declined to recount the conversations in detail, the people familiar with the meeting say that Biden, who frequently describes himself as America's most pro-union commander-in-chief, seemed taken aback by Sean Fain's pressure on him. So, listen, I don't know what the calculations were behind the scenes for the UAW's endorsement of Joe Biden. I think that they, maybe it's plausible that they could have gotten some sort of, a handshake deal behind the scenes that this is, policy X, Y, and Z that I need you to aggressively support and to try to back in order to actually get our endorsement. I don't know exactly what the details of this were behind the scenes. But, there needs to be a lot more pressure that's put on Joe Biden. I appreciate these protests. I support these protests wherever Joe Biden goes. knows? Eventually, you would hope that he would get the message. I mean, certainly his support for Israel in their genocidal war in Gaza is not helping his 2024 chances. We've seen his polling data, plummeting with Arab Americans, with Black Americans in many polls, and that's not necessarily connected to Gaza, but that is happening as well. And with young Americans as well, who care about the Palestinian cause for liberation and are absolutely disgusted. And this includes myself as well as a member of Gen Z. This is absolutely disgusting to see your government, right, especially from a generation that didn't necessarily grow up directly witnessing the early stages of like the Iraq War, for example, to see a president openly support and conduct these kinds of atrocities that are being committed in our name with our tax dollars, with our weapons. I mean, it's utterly disgusting and it's barbaric, and it's hard to justify throwing support behind a guy who is endorsing all of this. And so again, none of that is to say that Donald Trump is better on any of those issues, but it's just to say that this election may come down to a couple thousand votes here and there in swing states. And so even if you don't care about the morality of the slaughter of innocent men, women, and children in Gaza, even if you don't care about that, even if you only care about defeating Donald Trump in 2024 and making sure that Joe Biden is reelected, well, it would seem like this would be something that you would take into calculation and maybe adjust your course on policy for the sake of your own political future, for the sake of America standing on the world stage, if that's what you care about, and even for potential averting of a broader war in the Middle East, which obviously would be absolutely disastrous if we continue on the current trajectory that we are on right now. And so there are a number of different reasons why I think that Joe Biden needs to continue to be confronted on this, but it's genuinely hard to see him go out to rallies and to see supporters chanting 4 more years at people who are simply trying to call for a ceasefire, for an end to what has been an absolutely brutal campaign of slaughter and violence by a country that doesn't deserve a single bullet from the United States of America, in which the Joe Biden administration has basically been giving them every single thing that they could possibly imagine, whether that's militarily, diplomatically, politically, or whatever else.